Thank you. So welcome, everybody. I'm Peggy Harrison. I've probably spoken with a lot of you, and so today we'll put faces with names. I want to ask you, please, if you're not a presenter, if you're not speaking, or even if you are a presenter while you're not speaking, if you could put yourself on mute. That way we don't have a lot of background noise interfering. And feel free to use chat with any questions that you have. This is being recorded so that we can give you guys a copy. So now I'm going to turn this over to our executive director, Brian Kelmar.
Hi, and welcome. I'm so glad to finally put the names with the faces. I think I've talked to just about everyone on this. So this is who I look like, and I'm seeing who you look like, so that's nice. We started LRIDD back in 2015. I was one of the co-founders. Bill Bryant was another one. He can't be with us today, but Carol is with us, and I'm going to introduce Carol for some just brief comments. Nikki, if you go to the next slide. Carol? You're on mute. We can take Carol off of mute.
Hi, everyone. It is so glad to see everyone's faces, and welcome to the first ever annual LRIDD Zoom conference.
Thank you, Carol. Today we have a lot of special guests, and those special guests that are going to be speaking are family members who have all been through this nightmare. So they speak from personal experience and personal pain, and they have been just an outstanding team in helping us grow LRIDD. What we're trying to do today is we wanted you to learn about where we've been, where we're going, and what we're doing right now. And if we could just play a little clip.
Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance.
You may not recognize the voice. Some of us more mature people do. That's Robert Kennedy. He's talking about hope and ripples of change. And that's what we are trying to do through LRIDD, is making small changes that are creating ripples in the pond that create great waves to make change. So if I want to go through our agenda today, what we'll be talking about. Next slide. So I'll be talking about the organization, about LRIDD itself, and going through some of that things. The interesting speakers, I think, are going to be great and have some really good input. First up will be Jude Harrison. We'll be talking about taking care of you, the person who's advocating. Penny will be telling us more about how to tell your story, which is critical if you want to make a point and really make some change. And then Carol will be talking to us more about how to connect that story with the lawyers, the media, and anybody who you're going to talk to, and everybody you're going to talk to. And then Jude's going to update us on our webpage. We've had a lot of changes on that, and we have some more that we're working on. So really exciting things there. And then Maria's going to talk to us more about some social media. We just added a new social media on Instagram, which just came out last week. And then Nikki is going to present to us our latest program that we're setting out, and we think it's going to help you as parents. We'll be having questions along the way. We'll try and save about 2 minutes for questions after each presentation. If we don't get to you, we'll get it at the end. And then if we don't get those questions, we'll get back to you. So we'll be kind of keeping a heads up on the chat room of things coming or things that you want to talk about. All right, next slide. Background. So there's a typo on that. It's actually, we started back in May of 2015. Carol and I were on a webinar for the ARC of the US. And Carol and I told our stories. And typically on the webinar, they have between 100 and 150 people that typically show up. On this one, they had over 1,000 people show up before the network actually had to stop. They couldn't handle anymore. Carol and I presented. And afterwards, we met with Leanne Davis, who's with the ARC of the US. And Leanne said, well, why don't we start a subcommittee? This seems like a lot bigger issue than our one-off stories. So we started the subcommittee, and since that time, we've grown exponentially. It started out with 1 or 2 people every month, then every week, and now we're up to like 3 people a day. We have family members, doctors, advocates, lawyers, professionals, law enforcement, and we have members in almost every single state, and we even have people in the UK and Canada that are part of LRIDD. As I mentioned, we've grown through word of mouth, which is scary, right? Because we all think that we're the only ones out there that this is happening to, but it's a lot more common. And as I always tell people in the legislation, we talk about, you know, the kids with IDDD going through the public school system and having issues about getting inclusion. I said, well, what happens when these kids graduate? That's the next bow wave of issues. And this is it. This is what's happening. People are getting in trouble. And this is a big issue that people need to be aware of. We now have intakes that we get from our website. We also, when people reach out to the ARC of the US, that intake actually comes to me. And Jude and I and Carol and Penny, we all kind of work with them and try and help parents out. As we said, we started out as just a parent advocacy group, which is pretty powerful. Just a bunch of parents, and we're all a bunch of parents. Officially, we just became a nonprofit this year. So in February 2021, and that's going to help build us to where we want to take to the next level. Okay, next. Who are we? What are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to do legal reform for prevention, intervention, diversion, instead of prosecution for those with IDDD. And how are we going to accomplish that? Through ensuring equitable justice and ADA accommodations for those with individual IDD in the criminal justice system. And we're going to talk about, those are really the important things, the equitable justice, because we are really being the minority group that's actually being taken advantage of and not following American Disabilities Act's accommodations. And we'll talk more about that, how that has affected probably almost every single one of your cases. So what do we do as an organization? What are we all about? Well, we're 2 things. We're advocators and educators. We advocate for the families that are just starting this nightmare, those that are living the nightmare, and those who are been living this nightmare for quite some time, like many of us have. And what do? We educate. Now, people think we pass a lot of laws and that's all we do, but no, we're really about education. Legislation happens to get the most, I guess, the most visual or the most public responses, but we're educating families. Most of all of you, I've educated or talked to you about some of the issues that you're facing and why you're facing them. We have to educate our legislators, and we have to educate our judges, our lawyers, government leaders, and most importantly, the public. Why? Because we're all about change. This organization is about making change so that these things that are happening to you and to others in the community with those with ID and DD are not being scorned and thrown away from society like they've been doing to us. One of the things that we want to point out that we're not lawyers. We do have lawyers that we reach out to, but when we talk to you, we're not lawyers and we can't be your lawyers. You have to get your lawyers. Now we can help you what to look for in a lawyer and what things the lawyer should be asking. And that's what we're trying to help you with. We're not politicians. We're not Democrat, Republican, or independent. We're LRIDD. And I always say when we vote LRIDD. And as we found when we went to the legislation, we found that people with ID and DD, a lot of these legislators have kids on the spectrum and have ID. And it didn't matter whether they were Democrat or Republican, they understood. And what can't we do? We can't solve the issues for you. You can't say, Brian, Jude, or Carol, please take this and tell us. We're going to help guide you, but it's you that have to have the fight in you. You are the one, and we're going to help you get through that. Next slide. All right, so what have we done? I've talked about some of the laws, and you've probably seen some of these things that we put out to you on emails, but I want to talk briefly about why I passed the laws and what they're about and where we're heading. So as you remember our vision, right? We're prevention, intervention, and diversion. So prevention, how do you do that? It's education. You have to educate people with IDDD first. That's the most important part, because they're the first line of defense. If something happens or they get into something, it could be minutes, it could be hours, it could be days before they get to somebody who is one of their parents or helpers or whoever it may be. But if they understand and they are taught this from early on, we feel that probably 90 to 98% of them these issues will be prevented. How have we done that? We have done that through a bill that we passed here in Virginia, and we hope to roll out other places. This was our first legislation. It was actually carried by both a Democrat and a Republican and passed unanimously in both House and Senate, and then the governor made it law this last year. And actually they're rolling out the program this year. And what it is those who are in kindergarten through 12, who are intellectually and developmentally disabled, have a IEP, individual education plan. And part of that, there'll be goals in that. And some of those goals are like, learn how to, speak regularly or interact with others or whatever they may be, or learn math. But one of them is to learn about relationships and sexual behavior. Now, as we all know, we have to be a little politically correct. And here in Virginia, we call it family life education. But really, what is it? It's sexual health. And at kindergarten, you're teaching them, don't pull your pants down in the playground. And later, maybe you're teaching them about things like texting, sexting, looking on the internet, appropriate relationships as they start getting into teenagers. And once people with IDDD, one thing they're very rule bound. Once they learn it, and they will stick to that. Unfortunately, our education system in the United States does not have that. Now, Virginia has it. Some of the other states sort of have it, but we need to roll this out in all the states and actually make it federally mandated. So we were successful here. And the reason we're successful here is because I live here. I'd be out on other states, but Richmond is actually where I live, which is the capital, and the capital is only 15 minutes from my house. So I'm able to go down there. And where do you make change? Where you can influence the best, and then you roll out change from there. And that's our intention. What's the other most important thing? It's telling our stories. And I'm going to show a real quick clip here, if we could, of Jude Harrison. Jude, you met on the introduction. She'll be talking more. If we could play that.
People with autism have when they go into prison, that this young man would still be alive. He had a family who loved him, and he would talk to Drew about how he looked forward to returning one day home to his family.
Can you move that up a little bit?
One more time, Brian, I'm sorry.
Could you move that up a little bit towards the end? Right there.
Right here, okay.
He had a family who loved him.
Oh, sorry.
And he would talk to Drew about how he looked forward
a little further
to returning
down.
one day home to his family. He had a family. I appreciate you. I know you all are tired, and I'm emotional. I'm grateful to have my son home, but I ask you to please do something. Please support this bill.
Thank you very much for everything that you do for your family and for all of us in your advocacy. This is a difficult thing, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Please come forward.
If you could stop that.
Hi.
So that was Jude testifying at one of the subcommittees on our bill, and she's actually testified at several of these. Jude's not a professional speaker. Jude doesn't do this for a living, and she's never spoken in front of the organization. And you can see she was quite emotional. Those emotional stories, I will tell you, there's more to that clip, and you can watch it online. We can give you the clip. Those members of the legislation were in tears after Jude spoke. And why do I say, why is that important? because all of us have very emotional stories, and it's your stories that make the change. And that's what helped actually pass this bill unanimously, is those stories that they heard from Jude, myself, and several other parents that were there, Gordon and his wife that presented. So telling your stories is the most important thing about making change. The next one I want to go into is intervention. This is about educating law enforcement lawyers. We have a new bill, it's called Marcus Alert. And what that is that when these incidents happen, that people that are actually trained in intellectual and developmental disabilities actually show up with the police. So they hopefully can divert this from going into the criminal justice. And then this last one, which we just passed, was 1315, which just passed about a month or two ago and become law this July. This is pretty important because it recognizes intellectual and developmental disabilities at the beginning of a judicial process. What does that mean? It means that when you first go into court, your lawyer can bring up timeout, like we think all of us should have happened, right? Timeout. This child has, or this person has an intellectual and developmental disability. And this, he clearly did not have the understanding of what was going on and the situation. And our intent is to hopefully is that your charges or their charges or whoever's charges eventually get thrown out because they realize this isn't a criminal thing that they're doing. This is something that they didn't understand. Why? Because they didn't have the education to begin with. And two, because they didn't have the understanding of social norms. So that one's pretty critical. And then the last one we had was HB 659. And this is if people slip through the cracks, then in the prisons, they have to have ID and DD taken into account. And probably no prisons have that taken into account. The last one's diversion. Diversion was educating the judge so that when that, if it should go to criminal sentencing, is that the judge actually has the opportunity to stop it right there and divert the person to maybe you go get education, come back in 6 months, and if everything's good, we'll throw this case out. And that's how it should happen. Where are we going from here? I wanted to point out our legislation isn't ideal, but it's a start. And it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and it's important to get out there. We need your help. We need LRIDs in each state, and it starts with you being the advocate. And we can't do it alone. We can do it with you. Next slide. And now I'd like to have Jude talk about taking care of yourself, part of this process. Go ahead, Jude. Sorry.
Had to unmute myself. So thank you, Brian, for all of that. I know that anybody who is here today, you are either an advocate for or possibly the person who's going through this. I cannot talk more about the importance of taking good care of yourself. You know, this is probably the most horrible life experience that you'll ever have to go through, I hope. You know, I think that it probably is. I know that for us, having our son go through this and actually going to prison, that was the most horrifying thing that we've ever been through. So the stress becomes enormous, and you just often you don't know who to talk to about it. So, you know, we're here and we want you to reach out to us and to talk to us. And we'll talk later today about some of that. But our personal story, my husband, our family has been going through this since 2012. And so talk about, I had to learn how to take really good care of myself. I just don't think that I would be here if I had not learned the importance of doing that, putting myself first. We're thrown into this world where we're advocating for our child in most cases here. And there's just nothing more gut-wrenching than trying to help your child out of a legal situation that usually they don't belong in the first place. So, you know, I cannot emphasize enough, please find ways to move that trauma out of your physical body. It gets trapped in there, it gets stuck in there. when the slide first came on, there was a picture of a yoga mat. It said yoga with Jude and a teacup sitting on the end of it. I became a yoga teacher through in the middle of this mess. And it was just like a life-saving thing for me. I already practiced yoga, but I took it to the next level and had a yoga mat made for myself. So it's lightweight, it's cork. It reminds me when I pick it up that that's what I need. I need for my life to be lighter and more manageable. It's non-slippery because I need to be able to sustain myself and hold my balance in this world if I'm going to help my son. And there's a teacup sitting on the end of it. It reminds me that I cannot pour from an empty cup. None of you can. None of us can. So please take care of yourself. Find whatever it is that's your way. I know Brian runs, he runs marathons now, and my husband plays pickleball. Recently, I've had my family out in the yard, my son included, and we're digging holes in the ground and planting flowers and shrubs. And all of that is helpful in moving the trauma out of your body. So sometimes when I talk to a lot of you, I might ask you, what are you doing? How are you taking care of yourself? And I mentioned the word self-care and people think I'm talking about going out and getting a manicure. And so that can be it. But, you know, be sure that you're paying attention to how you're eating. Sometimes we don't eat very helpfully when we're going through something like this. Noticing that you're getting enough sleep. And if you're not, then find a healthy way to try to get a good night's sleep. We can't be the best advocates if we're not taking care of ourselves. Our creativity and our ability to handle everything that's involved in dealing with the legal process depends on us being as strong as we possibly can. So, you know, one of the most important ways that I feel that I have taken care of myself through this is I turned my pain into a purpose. And that has felt empowering and important and very much worth it. So I appreciate you all being here today. I know that you're all going through your own stuff. So, you know, if you want to help us out here in LRIDD, if that would make you feel good, if that would give you some sort of purpose, as some of the people who are volunteering here now have found that that's beneficial to them, then we invite you to contact us. And but please take really good care of yourself.
Thank you, Jude. I wanted to open it up for just a few minutes for any questions. As Jude mentions, I run. That's how I handle my stress. When I run, the only thing I can think about, obviously, is making it to the next block and still breathing. So whatever it is you need to de-stress, it's so important that, because you're the strength, you're the one that's going to make the change. So it's important that you are strong and can keep going. I know I talk to a lot of parents, and sometimes you're ready to go off the edge, and we kind of talk you back off the edge. But you need to make sure that you have those de-stressors in your life, because it's going to be extremely stressful and it doesn't get easier. Questions?
Brian, I'd like to say something.
Gordon? So Gordon is also one of our members here of LRIDD team on our board. Gordon Silver.
Well, I just wanted to say that thank you to everybody in LRIDD. We have a much more favorable outcome in that my son was in the system for 3 years, but for 3 years he never actually went to trial because they judged that he was not competent to stand trial. And finally, a couple of months ago, the case was actually thrown out. It was null plus, or whatever it is, you know, null pros, which means that basically they withdrew the charges. Jules and I, Jules is now completely free. We are working on having his case completely expunged out of the system. And but we go every Sunday morning, and we go and ride bikes down on the Richmond James, you know, the Capitol Trail. We go ride a couple, 10, 20 miles every Sunday, which is wonderful because it gives me a lot of chance to talk to Jules while we're driving there and driving back. So.
Thank you, Gordon. So Gordon is actually one of our recent success stories. If you hadn't heard that, we tried to put that out. that his case was dismissed. But you still, even if your case is dismissed, you both need help and support and to take care of yourselves, because it's not over just because you think the trial's over or whatever it is. I'd like to move on now to Penny. Penny has some lessons learned on telling your story, and I think this is very critical. Penny?
Hi, my name is Penny Gates. I am an advocate for criminal justice reform in Illinois, along with Carol. I'm currently a member of the Individuals with Disabilities in the Criminal Justice System Task Force. We're hoping to facilitate change. I'm so glad that we have this opportunity to be together, to learn from and to support each other, and to facilitate change. My son's story began on February 13th, 2013, a day I will never forget. I was completely broken for some time, about 3 years actually, and I never thought about telling my story. I was horrified at the thought. I thought that I was the only person in the world that this had ever happened to. I knew that the treatment my son had received in the criminal justice system was wrong, but I didn't know what to do about it. I was directed by ARC to LRIDD as a support group. This was back in about 2016. This group did not even have a name yet. It was enlightening. I was no longer alone. I found support and friendship, and I found strength. I found my voice. I now belong to many organizations encouraging us to share our stories, and I will share with anyone. As I began telling my story, I realized quickly that most people have no clue what can happen in the criminal justice system, especially to people with disabilities. I had no idea. And please know, your stories really do move people and make a difference. I turned my fear, my sadness and anger into advocacy. Being an advocate helps me. It's therapeutic. Our children and loved ones cannot advocate for themselves, so we have to tell their stories. And it does get easier. And I've learned a few things along the way. When speaking, always think about the audience you are speaking to. Think about what is important to them and what stance they may have. For example, I would speak differently to a crowd of law enforcement, which I have, than I'm speaking to you now. Target your audience. Our stories need to be short and concise. Otherwise, you will lose your audience attention. I've condensed 9 years into minutes. Make it personal. Tell how much impact it has had on your lives and how unjust it is. And it is okay to be emotional. Be clear about the difference in mental illness and IDD. Explain what IDD means, because most people really don't know, including professionals. In my effort to be clear, I have even explained that in my son's particular case, IDD means mental retardation. I make it clear that this is a term no longer used, but my audience now understands my son's condition. When I have shared what it means for my son and my family, because as families, we are on the registry as well, I have heard people gasp and I have seen tears because they don't understand the restrictions and how it affects people. I explain that my son cannot live independently, yet has to follow laws that he doesn't even understand. I explain that he could actually go to prison if he makes one innocent mistake. We have to educate people, especially legislators. They need to hear our stories. They need to understand how unjust our system currently is. You don't have to share every detail. I have learned about the reptilian brain, Most of you have heard of that. We all have it. And I'm sure you can think of a time when your own reptilian brain kicked in. Don't let that happen right now, please. It happens automatically, and it is a response to danger or fear. Therefore, it is very important to reframe how you say things. For example, if someone were to say, "My son is a sex offender," that brain goes to a place where hearing the important part of the message is no longer happening. Your true story has been lost. Instead, put it in the first person. My son is a young man with a disability who was caught up in the criminal justice system. That reframes your message. Instead of saying sex offense registration, say something like a disabled person required to register. Oftentimes, your audience needs to be reminded that we are human beings, not a label. Now feels like a really good time to be an advocate and to change things. There is a lot of attention and focus on criminal justice reform. We need to make sure that people with IDD are not overlooked. Thank you. Brian.
Thank you, Penny. I'd like to open that up for questions, comments from anyone.
Yeah, I have something. Can you hear me?
Dylan, go ahead.
Well, I totally support this thing because I don't want to incriminate anybody, but let's just say I have this friend who was very into dating in.
Dylan, I think we lost you. Can anybody hear Dylan? No. Dylan, we'll come back to you at the end. Hopefully we can reconnect with you and get that, connect you with your question. If not, you there?
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
Well, yeah. So I really support this because without incriminating anybody, I'll just say I have this friend who was in high school and very into dating. And when he got out of high school, he had the maturity level of probably a 13 or 14-year-old when he was 18, 19. And he was dating girls that were, 14, 15. And these girls were totally on his same level. I mean, they were, he was just, he hung out with a younger crowd and they were in his circle of friends. And so, yeah, these things are absolutely not, I don't think he was doing anything wrong because he's not a rapist. He wasn't anything like that. Right. He just took a little longer to mature. And once he matured, once he got into his 20s, he lost interest in high school girls like he was supposed to. It just was delayed.
So those are some great comments. And I think we have some actually experts here, Larry and Michelle. And I don't know if Mark's on here. One of the things is that those with IDDD typically are in sexually and social, emotionally, are 2/3 their age. So an 18-year-old chronologically is really emotionally and sexually understanding of social norms is that of a 12 or 13-year-old. And for them to relate to a younger person, they're actually right on par with them, right? Because that's what they are emotionally and how their brain is thinking. And the other point I always point out is I'm a little bit mature and older, but when I was in high school, I remember all of the girls in high school were actually dating boys in college. And today, I think they'd all be on the sex offender list because of that. It's because the laws have evolved and gotten so out of hand. And this is why we need to make change because this really affects those with IDDD. And Penny, thank you for telling us about how to tell your story. Those words that Penny said were exactly what I said when I presented was, my name is Brian Kelmar. I have a son with autism who got caught up in the criminal justice system. And that's as far as I went. And then the other stuff was about changing the law and why it was important. So really great points to make. And I really see maybe re-listen to Penny if you get a chance. You missed that. I'd like to turn it over to Carol, because Carol's going to talk now more about, so now you have a story, but you got to connect that story to multiple different groups. You got to talk to your lawyer, and that may be a different story that you tell than you tell the media. We have a lot of media, and Carol's going to talk about that. And then a different way that you speak to legislators. And then the last thing we're going to be talking about is understanding ADA. And I think we also have a slide on something that Penny touched on, is the difference between IDDD. And she is absolutely correct. 95% of the population probably has no clue of the difference. And we find that when we talk to legislators, we find that when we talk to psychologists, trained professionals. And I always tell people, okay, you need to go to a trained person that knows IDDD. Because if you don't, it's like going to a general practitioner for heart surgery. And believe me, I've been there. You don't want to be, you want to go to an expert in that area. So I'll turn this over to Carol. Carol, if you reintroduce yourself and tell us more about that.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Carol. A short bio on me is my family is from Illinois, but I do spend time in Florida. My son is 34 years old now with an intellectual and developmental disability. So he functions about the age of a 10-year-old child, which means he is completely dependent on his family. We're his caretakers and his advocate. And it was 2012 when my son was 25 years old when we got caught up in the system. So we've lost a lot, and I continue to fight. And I have a saying, if your path demands that you walk through hell, you should walk as if you own the damn place. So I hope today's conference is going to inspire you and motivate you. I want to talk a little bit about how to try and connect with the media and interacting with your legislators, attorneys, and a little bit about ADA. But as you've heard from Penny, she told you how to tell your story. Now you've got to get those stories out there and connect with the media. I can tell you firsthand, I hid for about a year. I didn't want anybody. I pushed everybody away, family, friends, everyone. And I didn't want anybody to know anything. And they pushed back. So I went out there and told everybody, all my family's friends, neighbors, everyone, and just so that they know the true story and not what they might assume in their, as Penny said, reptilian brains. I wanted them to know, and I got support from everyone. Everybody has stood by me. They back me. I never lost a friend, a family member, or anybody. So that confidence made me know that I could go out to the media as long as you're careful and tell my story. So I have, and I'm out there now. You can Google my name and see all the articles and the podcasts that I've done. And you'll find that when you do that, other publications pick it up, and other organizations will publish those articles and show those podcasts. So you manage to get yourself out there. And so then they come to you. An easy thing that I found for anybody who's just starting out is to go to the library and look at all the publications and check out the ones that you think might be interested in a story of this sort. Because right now, criminal justice reform is everywhere, and our children matter too. Now, Time Magazine did an article several months ago, kind of similar to this. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to try and contact them again and let them know, because LRIDD has notoriety now. We've got a fantastic logo. It looks very professional. You need to use all that in order to, be out there and say you're part of LRIDD now. We've got some notoriety. You should use it. So we need to get our collective stories out there. You should get your stories on our webpage, because a lot of times when we go out, instead of trying to make our stories brief, we will say, refer to the web page. There's a lot of stories on there. So if you could get your stories on the web page, we would really appreciate that, because that helps when people look at it and organizations look at it, that helps them to see what's really going on. So we've got to educate the public, and we've got to educate our legislators. And if we don't speak out, who's going to do it? We've got to do it. So in regard to talking to legislators, a personal visit is probably the best and the most effective. Now, Brian is really fortunate to be so close to the Capitol. I'm about 5 hours away and Penny's 7 hours away. We've made the trek, but if you can't, a letter, an email, anything like that works. But, it is a good idea if you can get to your Capitol and talk in person to your legislators, but let them know who you are, that you belong to LRIDD and who you're representing, and be clear but be brief, so that you're getting your point across, your vision. And I like to start out with the statement that, it's hard to connect with an issue that's not at your front door, but that doesn't stop it from happening. So if you could listen to my story or our stories and imagine that it's happening to you or your loved ones, and don't think it can't happen to you, because in my wildest dreams, I never thought it could happen to me. So, lastly, after you talk to a legislator, make sure you send a thank you note. And if you're sending a letter, an email, request a reply from them. I mean, you deserve to hear back. So that's something that I think we can all do. We can all find out who our legislators are. We can all reach out to them and just use LRIDD. I use it all the time. I've got professional letterhead now with our logo, and I've got, business cards, and I go in there and just act the part, So it's not that hard. And when you are also interacting with lawyers, that's another thing where it's a little bit different. You need to remember to hire and interview a lawyer who has the experience and who has the expertise to defending people with IDD. And if you can't find any, and believe me, I'm still looking. So there are few and far between. Make sure that they are open to learning about disabilities, and make sure they're open to working with an advocacy group and to defend your child as best as possible. Don't be afraid to fire them if they're not, because they're not going to help you then. So they also have to know, like we spoke about, they have to know the difference between mental illness and developmental disabilities. We find that a lot of legislators, it all gets lumped together. And if you can see from this slide here, it's totally different. You can treat a mental illness, but you cannot treat an intellectual or developmental delay. They have to know this. Now, I am also, along with Penny, appointed to the governor's task force in Illinois to protect people with disabilities in the criminal justice system. And we're working now for an individual specific court for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, because they do already have a court for mental illness. But there is a huge difference, and you have to make sure with an attorney, with your legislators, that they know who you are and about your child. So that's a very important thing to do. Also, in regard to ADA and compliance, I'm sure if you've all looked at it, the directives are that they are supposed to accommodate your child when you are in the courtroom and talking to law enforcement and so on. And I bet I could talk to all of you here, and none of you were accommodated for like you should have been by the ADA. But these are directives, and we're finding the Illinois directives talk about it, but they do not mention IDD in there at all. So right now, that's what Illinois is working on. But I have filed a grievance with the Department of Civil Rights in Washington, D.C., and you can do it too. All you got to do is go online to ada.gov and fill out a complaint form. And I think the more people that do it, the better. Now, they did give me a case number, and they investigated, and I got a denial. They said I wasn't within my 180 days because it's been 9 years. And I just sent it right back. I don't want you to give up, because I sent it right back and said, this is an ongoing complaint from 2012 all the way to 2021. So file your grievance with the ADA and let them know that you have a complaint. But I just want you to know that don't give up, tell your story, work with your legislators, join support organizations, join together with other LRID members in your state and form a chapter and be an active part of our growing organization. George Washington said, truth will ultimately prevail where there is pains taken to bring it to light. So this isn't easy. There are good times and there are bad times, and we're all here to support each other. And that's what LRID does. We support each other. So I think today, if you could take some information back from this, we need your stories. We need you to go and connect with the media. We need you to go talk to your legislators. We need you to, if you are in the process of hiring an attorney, make sure that they are trained or willing to be trained. And let's all go forward.
Thank you, Carol. Questions, comments? Okay, just a couple of points I wanted to legislators and talking to them. One of the things that you may not realize is that your legislator, even though he or she is up at the legislation most of the time, they have offices in their local areas. So if you live in the rural area, I'm quite sure your legislator, and this is your state legislator, the one that makes the state laws, not the one that goes to DC, he or she has an office somewhere, or maybe it's their own office where they're working their regular day job that you can go see and talk to in person. And I think that's really important that Carol is saying, is that person to person is so important. They need to see your face. They need to see the pain. They need to look you in the eye and say no, which is hard to do in any situation. People do not want to look a person in the eye and say no. So I think that's really important. Your stories, as Carol said, we've all been afraid to tell our stories, and most of us now in LRID, we are telling our stories, and we tell it to everyone and anyone that'll listen. I tell it to my running partners so that they know, and we get the same reactions that Carol got. Was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is happening. This is crazy. The media, Jude and I and Carol and some of the others and Penny have been on, I don't know, multiple media things. I usually get a request now almost weekly, and we just started out with just a few interviews back last summer. I've got a webinar coming up this Tuesday, which we'll put out, that I'm on. So once you get out there, they will find you, because people are trained in specialties in media. So there's people that focus on criminal justice, there's people focused on sports, and they are all tied together, and they look for stories like ours. And believe me, they want to tell it. With that, I'm going to turn this over to now what's happening with our website and more on our social media from our Director of Communications, Jude.
All right, thank you. So some of you, I want to thank you for sending me your stories. And if they're not up yet, then please be patient with me. and I am doing my best to get more help. But you know, we have some people that will introduce themselves to you in a little while who have stepped up and helped take a lot of work off of my plate, and I'm so grateful for them. So a little bit of help with the website would be fabulous. So if you want to, just reach out. So check out our new website if you haven't. It's really not new anymore at this point, but we will soon be adding more pages to it. As Brian said, we have, you know, like Carol's been on, I don't know how many podcasts, I've lost count. Brian and I have done podcast webinars. So we're going to have a page for all of that stuff so that you can easily find it and just scroll down and say, oh yeah, I wanted to hear what Brian had to say, or what Carol was interviewed about. So that is coming very soon. So our contact us button, we'll be adding Carol to that also. And mailing list, let's see, please, we had a problem with, we lost several emails and we don't know how. And I've recently had a few people reach out to me and say, I finally found you again, you know. And so please, if you know other people who were on the previous, like a long time ago, email list, let them know. All they have to do is go to our website and say, join us, and just fill in the email address and you'll start receiving the newsletter. And you'll also notice if you go to the website that down at the bottom, there's a donate button. So we have had people, thankfully, sending donations. Right now, nobody gets paid a dime. So all of the work that is done by everyone is volunteer, just, you know, out of love and the goodness of our hearts. But we do have expenses. And so donations are very much appreciated. If any of you have a connection with Bill Gates or some sort of a philanthropist, please let them know the good work that we're doing in LRIDD and that it's worthy work, needs to be done, and ask them to throw $100,000 our way. And then a small piece that is helpful and can seem like it wouldn't be all that important, Amazon Smile. We have a link for them, and I'm going to try to get the webmaster to, I think she can turn it into a hyperlink and make it smaller on our website, but we'll be adding that soon. If you buy from Amazon, please choose us, like go to smile.amazon.com and then choose LRIDD as your charity of choice. And we, believe it or not, that will add up at the end of the year. It will help to pay for the website, for the, you know, stamps, for all of the little expenses that are really actually big expenses that we have. So I think that is it that I wanted to say. So if I have not added your story, please know that I am working on that. And if I have any questions about it, I always get in touch with parents and let them know. So if you haven't sent your story, please do take a look at our website, take a look at the stories. And as Carol was talking about, and Brian, we've all said it, can't say it enough times, the stories are what change laws, and laws are, you know, what changes our children's lives for the better. So I'm going to turn it back over to Brian, and unless I'm going to check here and see if somebody has a question.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
By the way, I just donated $20.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. What would you say to people who would say, you know, in regards to my friend, who would say, well, he should have just stayed celibate or not dated until he was ready to date girls that were, you know, over the age of whatever?
So actually, there's some great resources out there, and two of those resources are actually on this video conference. Dr. Nick Dubin. Nick will put out your book. We're going to put a little plug for you. Nick has a great book, actually has several great books on relationships, and also this, what we've been going through here in the process and how to handle that. The other person that is on here is Dr. Michelle Garcia. Michelle has a, I'll send this link out to you guys, has a course that she's putting out, and it's going to be online. It's a 14-week course, and you can join in the middle of it, just it'll be ongoing, and it helps people that are already out of the system, out of the school system, to learn about appropriate relationships and working with others to understand what their relationship is and their issues. So I will put out more on that. So no, you shouldn't be celibate, because people need to remember, just because you have a disability doesn't mean the rest of the body doesn't work. Everything else is the same thing as everyone else is going through, whether it's their maturity or whether it's their development. They still have the same issues, the same wants, the same basic needs that everyone else does. And that's the thing that we're telling people is our family members with the disability are being discriminated, and they shouldn't be. They are just like everyone else. They just happen to have a disability. And guess what? We probably all have some sort of disability. Last I checked, we're not perfect. So, I would encourage them to reach out to some of these resources, and we'll put those out later on via our email.
Yeah, what I would just say real quick is I would just say this guy, he was always a very nice guy. He was never a bad person. And so I don't really understand what harm these girls that were a few years younger than him got from dating him that they wouldn't have gotten dating any other guy. I mean, it seems very esoteric to me to try to explain that. But that's just what I would say.
All right, Dylan. Well, thank you. And feel free to reach out to me directly if you need more information on that. Next, I'd like to introduce Maria, who's going to talk about our other social media, which we have starting to get a lot of. Maria, and next slide.
Hi, everybody. Greetings from Maine. I was just looking at that previous slide with the Amazon smile, and with all the stuff that I order from Amazon, I think maybe it can keep you in business for like a long time. But I'm just 2 minutes on social media. We have a Twitter page, and that's should be up. It's LRIDD1. And as of last week, we have a brand new Instagram profile, which hopefully we'll be updating, hopefully daily. And that is LRIDDUS. You can search for that on Instagram. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Facebook, because it came to my attention that a lot of people don't know the difference between the page and a group. And we have both. The page is almost like a website, but it's dynamic. It's our page to the public. Anybody searching for it can find it and read what's on it. And I try to keep that updated with articles and memes. But we also have a Facebook group. And right now it's fairly small. I think there's 68, 69 people in it. And to be in it, you have to be vetted. There are screening questions. And once you're in it, it's a safe place that you can ask questions. If you're having an awful day, if you were in court all day and you came out and you need to vent, it should be a safe place where anybody can post who's a member and get support from other people there. So I just wanted to put that out, that is probably a good support for people. And I know that's what I was looking for. And also, I think it's a good way to get in touch with other people, to find out, are there people near me in my state? Anybody out there from Maine, anybody out there from Connecticut, or wherever you are. And hopefully we can organize into groups, smaller groups. And then you can help us also, just a 2-second on social media marketing. When things are posted to the page or the group, it actually is only seen by 5.2% of the audience. So if there are 100 people that like our page, 5 or 6 people will see the article that's put out there. So ways that you can help is you can thumbs up it, you can make a comment on it, you can share it to your own profile. And the more comments and thumbs up, or if you don't like it, an angry face, that will help it go out to more people. And I know that that's the same with any small business, whether it be us or whether it be, you know, your favorite taco shack. If you want to help them get some free publicity, just thumbs up everything, or do a happy face, or make a comment like, great job. I have my husband trained. He does it to everything now. So that's just one thing, if you could help us out. And also, if you find any good articles or memes or pictures or anything, message them to me and I will post them on the page. It seems like there are plenty of articles out there, but I can always use new ones. So that's what I wanted to say about Facebook. We also have a newsletter, which we're going to get out hopefully monthly, and also send out any little bits of news. And if you have any news or stories or anything that you want included, email that to us. And if you want your story to be anonymous, we can change the name and put it out there. You know, what are you doing in your state? You know, have you started a support group in your state, or have you done this or that? And I think that would be really inspirational to go out to everybody as well. Back to you. Oh, wait, before, in the next week or so, I'm working on a survey that's going to go out to everyone on the mailing list. And it's going to be quick, probably less than a minute to fill out, mostly demographics, you know, your name, your phone number, your email, your city and state, you know, where you are in the legal process, basic questions, just so we can update our files. So look for that.
I want to point that out. That's very important on this survey. We talk to literally hundreds of families. And quite honestly, even sometimes when I talk to you guys, I have to think of your story because I don't remember them all. And sometimes we need help in saying, well, I know Maria. Maria's up in Maine and she came across this. Reach out to Maria. That information stays confidential. It stays with us. The only people that will see it is probably just 3 of us. And that is the executives of LRIDD. No one else will see that information. It is for ours so that we have the stories. It also helps us when we tell our stories. I can go back and I'm not looking for things. I can say I have 50 people in Texas, or I've got 10,000 people and I have a list. So reporters often ask me how many people or how many names you have. And I have no idea, because we try and track it by email, but I can't keep track of that. So it's really important you get back to us on that. I appreciate it. Any other questions, comments? Okay, now I'd like to move on to the next part. As you'll see, I have my wine. And Nikki, if you would take over our next piece, which is our monthly support group. This is our newest addition to LRIDD. It's Wine and Wine, and I'm starting my drinking now.
Oh, well, hello, everyone. My name is Nikki Dowd, and my family and I live in Fredericksburg, Virginia. My husband and I have 3 children, 3 young adults. The youngest is 20. He is on the spectrum, and he got caught up in the criminal justice system in 2019. And like many of you, I am just so grateful for all of the help LRIDD has provided during my time of need. So given the opportunity to show my support to LRIDD by working with Brian, Jude, Carol, Penny, Maria, and facilitating monthly support group meetings is the least I can do to just say thank you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Wine and Wine. So, you know, with Wine and Wine, it's okay, but not too much of both. All right, so you can do a little bit, but just not too much of both. The meetings are designed to help us make connections and create a sense of community as, you know, we all support one another on our journeys. These meetings are not meant to really be a cry on the shoulder type session. You know, we understand that it is okay to, you know, become emotional, but what we want to encourage each other to do is to just keep moving. You know, don't stop until you've reached your goal. So like I said, you know, when we say wine and wine, yes, but not too much of both. And we mean it. So keep in mind with these meetings, you know, we want to know what's going on with everyone. These meetings will serve as a platform for us to just learn best practices and as also a means for us to identify our next steps and just set short-term goals. Now, in between our monthly meetings, and I do want to say that we will meet on the second Saturday of the month. So our first meeting will be held on June 12th at 12 p.m. So it's only 1 hour. And in between our meetings, we will use Padlet as another means to just share resources and some best practices. We'll also use Padlet to post questions, answer questions. I know Maria was talking earlier about, you know, Facebook and posting questions there, but for some of us who may not have Facebook, I don't use Facebook. So this is just another way for us to share resources and post questions and things of that nature. I will show you what Padlet looks like in a moment. And there will be times where we'll have guest speakers come in, perhaps Carol, Penny can come in and just go over just some techniques, what we can do to help share our stories, things that we can do to advocate for ourselves. Jude and Brian, I know that they'll pop in a few months. Hopefully, yes. I see Brian. Yes. Great. And again, the purpose of the support group is just to remind ourselves and each other, just to acknowledge where we are, but don't get stuck there. Just process and move forward as we just pull each other along. And so let me go ahead and go to Padlet for you all so you all can see what that looks like. So I'm going to stop share. Click on Padlet. Come back over here. Here we go. All right. Can you all see my screen? It's perfect. Okay, so as I said, we'll use Padlet just as another way for us to share resources, post questions here. So in between the meetings, you could come over here, post a question, you know, just click on this plus sign at the bottom right. And, you know, if you're working on something or if you just have a question, you could just post it here, you know, test question. And anyone could come back, you know, along the way and just, you know, provide a comment, just add a comment. They may know, they may have an answer for your question or whatever the case may be. And just another way for us to share resources. Now, during our monthly meetings, we will have access to the link and we'll share the link at our first meeting. And so this is another private group and it will be moderated by myself. Any questions? Okay, let me stop share. Well, that's all I have.
Brian, your speaker.
I guess I should. Oh, there we go. Okay, technical difficulties. That's why we have this team that helps me out. I want to thank Nikki for stepping up to do this. This is really an important area, that next phase of LRIDD that we want to develop. A lot of you are going through this emotional roller coaster, and it is a roller coaster. And it's really good to know that you're not alone and that you have a support group behind you to ask questions and said, I just had one of those days out of the court and I'm just at wit's end, or what do I do? Or what's the next steps? And if you can't get a hold of me, I will be in some of those meetings. We'll be able to get lessons learned. Somebody will jump in and say, well, I'm from Texas and I know this person here that is the best whatever that we've used before, and this worked out well for us. Or, you know, we tell about Gordon's case where Gordon said, you know, we were able to do this and able to get his case thrown out. Have you guys considered that? So it's really a best practices, and also a opportunity, as this little slide says, a little wine And some of us have to, relax with wine. So you can bring a little wine. Just, don't go through the whole bottle like some of us, but, and you can whine somewhat. But here's the opportunity. And Nikki, I think, is going to hold you accountable and say, okay, so what are we going to do about it? Right? Because it's not just saying, it's good to get it out. It's good to share, but it's good to figure out what are we going to do next to help you out. All right. With that, we still have about 15 minutes. We're not going to take the whole 15 if we don't need it, but I wanted to open it up to the floor of all of you to get a chance to speak. And Dr. Garcia, if you want to actually do a little plug for your group there, I appreciate that. And Nick, a little bit about what you're doing, and anybody else who wants to talk about just their story or questions that we have. So if you would, I don't know if we have to raise your hand or whatever, the best to bring that out.
Hi, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Dr. Garcia.
Okay, hi, I'm Michelle Garcia, psychologist. I am in Texas. And there's two really exciting things that we've been doing lately that I'm hopeful will be helpful for all of you guys or for somebody that you know. So I've teamed up with Dr. Natalie Montfort here in Texas, and we are doing testing for individuals who need that as part of their defense in the criminal justice system. So to diagnose autism or to speak on why this certain incident may have occurred because of, the diagnosis, or because, not because of the diagnosis, but hopefully you guys understand what I'm saying. But basically to justify the fact that, somebody maybe because of their symptomatology may have thought differently about something than somebody else, and things like that. So we are doing that testing because I'm part of what's called SciPact. I'm able to do that testing through televideo for many states. And I did send Brian a list of those states. For other states that are not yet in that SciPact agreement, they would have to come to Texas. So we've already had one individual who was out of state came to Texas at the request of Mark Mahoney. So he's been also facilitating individuals getting tested by Dr. Montfort and myself. So that's one thing that we are doing. The other thing, as Brian mentioned, we, myself and one of my other clinicians wrote a healthy relationships curriculum, and it's the one referenced in Virginia. We've been running groups, and other organizations have been running groups nationally for junior high through adults for years. And we recently, because of COVID, got word that an organization in Louisiana was running the groups virtually. And we thought, well, gosh, that's a great idea. It is interactive. It is meant for the individual with the disability to be in the group. It's fun, it's engaging. It covers 16 different chapters, from social skills to healthy relationships, public-private, rights and responsibilities, etc. And it does run for approximately a year. It's going to be weekly and starting in June. So I've sent the flyer over to Brian. It's a national group, and we've already got about 6 or 7 people interested in Pennsylvania, as well as others in Texas and nationally. So if you know somebody who might be interested, send them our way. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Garcia. And I do want to point out, Dr. Garcia is actually the, I want to say, my catalyst or my hero on this education bill. We had worked together, and the remarkable work she has done in other counties across the country. I use her education piece, and I've seen her education layout, and we use that as a model for going for the legislation. So I'd like to really personally thank Dr. Garcia for that inspiration in really helping us out to get that law passed, which we hope to get in others. So she is licensed, as she said, in several other states. Whether you need for your son or relative that kind of support to get that education, I think it's important if they haven't had that education. And also, she's also a forensic psychologist with understanding in autism, which she's worked with one of our best lawyers. I say the best in the country. A little bragging there, Mark. I'm not sure if you're on here, Mark Mahoney. So thank you so much for that. And if I could turn that over, Nick, I hate to put you on the spot, but could I let you, and we don't get kickbacks on any of this, so there's not money involved. Nick, I'd like you to talk a little bit, if you could, about your books. And these are some worthwhile books to read. There's some other books out there, and I have some resources which we've gotten also from several of our other LRIDD members. So I'll put out on our webpage.
Well, thank you, Brian. It's really a pleasure to be here. And you know, what I've spent the last 2 years doing is working on this latest book, which to me is the most important book I've ever written. And I've taken the research out in the open access, you know, Google Scholar, everything that I can find, and I've combined it into a book on prevention. Michelle probably knows a little bit more about that, but I felt that a whole chapter on that was necessary because we need to keep our vulnerable population out of the criminal justice system. We want to be put out of business if we could. And so a chapter was spent on that. A chapter was also spent on keeping individuals in the criminal justice system informed with their parents about what to do once they get involved in the system. There's so many parents who, once they get involved, they've never had any interaction with the criminal justice system other than watching shows on TV, and they don't know the first thing about what to do. So it's a guide for knowing what to ask the lawyer, knowing what's important once the case gets involved. There's questions that come up about polygraphs, for example, that most people don't have the answers to because there's not a lot of research on it. Well, there are actually some articles out there on heart rate variability with individuals on the spectrum and how the autonomic nervous system of people on the spectrum is fundamentally different. So we got a lot of parents that come to us and say, you know, the polygraph came back indeterminate or this person failed the polygraph, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't telling the truth. And I actually talk about that in the book. Unfortunately, I could not find a single article that focuses directly on polygraphs and autism. It just doesn't exist. But if you dig a little deeper, you do find that there's information on the autonomic nervous system, the heart rate, the skin skin, sweat, and responses that autistic people have, which is due to anxiety. So the baseline is always going to be higher in those instances. And I don't think a lot of people know that. I think a lot of lawyers just assume, well, if my client fails the polygraph, then they've got to suffer the consequences. So we get a lot of questions. LRIDD gets a lot of questions on that. I also want to, talk about alternative ways, as we've been doing throughout this entire presentation. Diversion. That has been a huge theme in my book, and I back it up with research as far as why I think that's best for recidivism, because if you send an autistic person to prison, they're going to disintegrate, probably end up in solitary confinement for not understanding what's going on as far as following instructions and pissing off correctional officials. That's not going to help them with their rehabilitation. Recidivism rates are low, even with people who do go to prison, but we want to keep it that way and do the best possible things that we can as far as what I would say habilitation instead of rehabilitation, because we're essentially teaching some of these skills to individuals for the first time. It's, when we think of rehabilitation, we think they knew at one point what they were doing and they fell off the wagon and we got to get them back on the wagon. And this book really looks at it from a sense of, we're teaching primary skills that they're learning for the first time. And that's how any therapist going into these therapeutic encounters with people on the spectrum should be looking at it. And unfortunately, the therapeutic encounters are typically confrontational. And we get a lot of parents also who say, my son can't handle being in group. They're hearing things about what other people are doing that's nauseating to them. And all of what I'm speaking about, I've talked about in my book at great length. I did write a book in 2014 about my own personal experiences going through the criminal justice system, which Mr. Mahoney wrote the foreword to. It was a really great foreword. And before that, before my arrest, I had written some books about anxiety and depression, but I'm really you know, the book that's coming out now to me is the one that I have the most investment in, and I really hope legislators read it, and anybody who you're trying to advocate to. I would hope it would be helpful. I say that modestly because I don't know how helpful it will be, but I hope it is helpful.
Thank you, Nick. I really appreciate that. I'd like to open up some more comments from the general public, and then I'm going to point out a few more people on the call, like Tanya and Mark. Questions or comments from others?
Well, I have something that's a little, I have something that's a little bit not directly related. Would there be a better time at the end where I could, it's more of like a networking request?
You can ask. That's what we're here for.
Oh, okay. Well, I do public speaking. I have high functioning autism. I've written an autobiography, and I did public speaking before COVID. I've spoken at a lot of major conferences and stuff. I am trying to resurrect my public speaking career now that COVID is wrapping up and it's opening up again. So but it's, it's tough. So if there's anybody here who has any connections, knows any conferences, or could be of any help to me, I would love to connect with you. I can show you a TED Talk that I've done, just like a 4-minute clip, and you'll see what I do. And I think you'll really, I don't talk about this exact topic, but I talk about a lot of very similar things.
And as you noticed, Dylan, as you were doing that, I held up your book. I actually have
well, that's my dad's book that I co-wrote, but I actually have my own. Yeah, but I have my own.
You have your own?
Yeah.
And Dylan.
Yeah, my own came out after that.
And Dylan is, he's a very strong advocate. I've heard him speak. He's been a guest speaker with his dad. So he's been great. I'd like to introduce just a couple other people real quick. Thank you, Tanya, for showing your face. So Tanya Milling, you probably have heard me talk about Tanya quite a bit. Tanya has been kind of my rock, my resource, my advocate, my support, you name it. Tanya was holding my hand through every one of these bills and teaching me the ways of how to do it and how to get the influence and how to work on these bills. So I want to recognize her for the just unbelievable work and support that she is behind the scenes and for helping LRIDD. And we're trying to actually look at trying to roll out similar partnerships. Tanya is the executive director of the ARC of Virginia, and she is very well versed in working with numerous organizations and especially with the legislation. Like I said, Jude and I have relied on her, and she has just basically held our hands through this entire process. So yes, we've been successful, but this is the lady of why we are successful. So Tanya, I hate to put you on the spot, but can you say just a few words?
Well, thank you. Well, certainly. How could I say no after that sweet stuff you said? Thank you. It's really been a long road, but an absolute pleasure working with LRIDD. And there's been a great amount of success because of all the work of everybody. All of you, and the stories and the calls and the emails definitely is what makes it happen. So I wanted to be here today for your first event, and I am glad things went so well. And it's good to put some faces with some of the names. But thank you for all of that you said, Brian, and for the work of everybody here, because it wouldn't happen without you. So thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. I really appreciate that again. Another very important person that part of LRIDD and has been to a lot of for my legal go-to and bouncing things off and actually sending most of you to him also is Mark. Can you come off of show your face there, Mark Mahoney?
My face has been there. I guess I'm very.
Oh, there you are, Mark. I'm sorry.
I'm very unnoticeable, I guess.
Mark is, as I mentioned, is the lawyer that I like to say. He is the best lawyer in the country in this. So, and many of you have already talked to him. So, Mark, if you wouldn't mind saying a few words.
Well, it's always tricky advising me to say anything because I can go on, as you know, for hours on any one of these topics. So I was just thinking with talking about therapy and sexuality training. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff I've got to say about that with Nikki. I sort of want to remind me that one of the most critical things, I think, in the overall effort is that I've been trying to collect data on any case involving autism, criminal case, because nobody in the world is doing that. And one of the ways to get policy affected is by showing the impact of this. And what I really want to do, I mean, I've got over 150 cases I've sort of identified. I've got 2 clerks working on trying to categorize these cases and get the, get the data into it so we could do like publish something about, okay, what really are the characteristics of people with autism who get caught up in these online offenses? Things like, what are the Vineland scores? What's their diagnostic history? Was there an allegation of touching or not? Was there, is this somebody who ever had any kind of prior problem with the law? Did they ever re-offend? And the answer to that is 0 so far in the cases I've found, with only the exception of people who were not diagnosed or got appropriate treatment when they were in their first case. This kind of data is the thing that can make a difference in setting policy at the top end. I'm still struggling to get like an intake form. The data that we need is so complex, but that's something that, I want to, we don't have enough people on this call. I'm not gonna really worry about it. It's something that just comes to mind. One thing I wanted to say is yesterday, or actually on Friday, by Zoom, I attended the memorial service for Peter Rubino. Peter was the first person that I represented in 2007. He was a freshman at the University of Rochester. His parents had reached out to an attorney in New York who contacted me. Peter had been diagnosed at the Yale Child Study Center by Ami Klin and Fred Volkmar as a youngster. He's a beautiful kid, curious about everything. One day the FBI showed up at the door asking questions because he had posted something on a Craigslist or somewhere on the internet. How do you make methamphetamine? And so they, the police show up at the door. Peter gets arrested for child pornography. And he is the first person ever, after 2 years of me learning about something I never knew anything about and studying, reading everything I could find. We finally got the government in rather bizarre fashion, got the government to agree to let him plead to something that didn't require registration and didn't require him to go to jail. But he did plead to a felony, transportation of obscene material, which others here know that's been a sort of a go-to charge, but not unproblematic, right, Tom? Tom Candelera is on the call. And that was, and that's when I wrote my paper in 1970 and 2009 about this. It's on the AANE website, and that's how a lot of people found me. And I started doing this, and now I think, as everybody knows, this is the only thing I'm doing. And we now have about 26 cases where people were not required to register and weren't required to go to jail in state and federal court. Not all were my cases, but the cases I was involved in indirectly in most of the ones that I wasn't doing directly. So a lot has been accomplished, but what I'm telling lawyers now at the end of my lectures, I'm showing pictures of Peter who couldn't get a job. His very first interview went for a serious job that was commensurate with his talents. The interviewer asked him about his conviction, and Peter tried to explain, and the guy said, well, I wouldn't recommend you for a job at McDonald's, and I wouldn't want anybody to go near you. And he humiliated Peter so badly that Peter never went for another interview for a job. So the jobs he got weren't that great. He lost a job in COVID. He started drinking. Peter had never been a drinker. And his dad persuaded him to go to an AA meeting. And on January 6th of this year, he went up to wake up Peter to go to this meeting, and Peter couldn't be. He was unresponsive and ended up dying in the hospital. So when I talk to lawyers now, I say, the funny thing about it, not funny thing, the interesting thing about it, I guess, in a certain way, is when his mother Marie called me and told me about this, of course, for me, it was all about, oh my God, if I knew then what I knew now, maybe Peter wouldn't have even been convicted. And maybe he would be alive. And Marie, also all Marie was about was the 13 years they had when Peter wasn't on the registry and didn't go to jail. She was full of gratitude. I mean, of course, this is like all parents of kids with autism. They always are looking on the bright side. And yet, and his two brothers spoke at the service, talking about how wonderful he was as a brother. And they knew all his quirks and all his oddities and loved him for it. And the ones who were his baby brothers then later became his big brothers. Because Peter needed that guidance still, but Peter became depressed and took pills, and he's no longer with us. So I tell lawyers exactly what I just said. Now you know what I know. You know 10 times what I knew when I had my first case, and so you do better than I did, and learn from all this. And I think all of you know I'm doing lectures all over the country all the time. Talking about books, the 2 chapters I wrote for Fred Volkmar's book, I'll be out in July. But that's pretty much the paper that I based that on. I give to every lawyer who asks for it and every family who asks for it. But it's just a sad reminder that even just having a conviction doesn't do it for these guys who have such a difficult time just meeting the social world and fitting into the social world.
Thank you.
I mean, Nick, I know Nick could speak for hours, I think, on, he having a conviction itself is really terrible. But I guess what I want to say, as long as I'm here, and somebody like Dylan, thanks for speaking up, Dylan, what we're always looking for. I've got all sorts of stories about people that got arrested and so on, but I'm always looking for stories from different people on the spectrum, autobiographical stuff, where they talk about how hard it is to understand social norms, where they talk about the difficulties, and I get this, John Robison has helped me with that, and others have helped me with that. It's always a big thing, making the case to people at how pervasive the difficulties are, even for people who aren't arrested. But anyway, as long as I'm here, if anybody has any questions, I'm sorry I'm late. I've been in my office. We've got something we had to file tonight in a federal case that I've got to be a sentencing in on Tuesday down in Philadelphia. So we were just slaving away here, and I just couldn't get on in time.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you taking the time, and please reach out to Mark with your stories. I think it's important. We're running out of time. I do want to recognize one other person who has been in the beginning of this is Larry Dibid, Nick's dad. Larry was one of the first people I talked to in helping to get the organization up and going. So I wanted to recognize you, Larry. Thank you for all that you've done in support. And he is doing a lot of advocacy at the Michigan State. He's pounding his head, but keep pounding away, Larry. We really appreciate what you're doing. He's a professor there in Michigan. So thank you. Tom, I wanted to say hi. And all of the group, I want to thank the parents, most of all, you advocates, for being here with us for our first convention. We look forward to seeing you and growing in the next couple of years. And to the next point, hopefully at some time we will no longer meet. And then we know we've accomplished our mission and vision.
Hey, Brian, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I just want to raise it with other people here. I have so many cases. It's just, if people try to reach me and I don't get back to you right away, pester my assistant, Devon. But one thing that is really a crushing problem is that I've got people who just can't afford some of the expert services that we need. And is LRIDD set up? Can you accept, do you have any kind of like part of the organization where you can have a fund where people can contribute and that fund can be used for expert services and cases? Can I direct people to LRIDD as a place where you can make contributions for purposes of providing expert assistance?
What we're looking at is right now we're just building, as Judith mentioned, and we have our donation, which is on our website. And that is one of our future goals. I didn't want to put that out because I don't have the resources yet, but that is one of the future goals, is finding resources for either lawyers that we have funds to help pay for lawyers, or two, that we have a source of lawyers that will do it pro bono. But that is something that as we build our donations and trying to network for getting funds in different organizations, that is a specific area that we want to target, Mark. And that
I'm thinking
I'll take most of your
I can
inputs.
raise, my point is, if I can get somebody who wants to give up money, I can't fundraise for my clients. They, we may have other ways where they, with some advocates, could do like a GoFundMe or something like that. But I need some place to hold money, or some organization too can decide, oh yeah, this person needs it, and here's the money. So I'm not talking about you raising the money, right? I mean, obviously I'd love that too, but if I can find people who want to contribute, do you already have something set up where they could make that contribution and you'd be able to maybe have a committee or a financial committee or some sort of committee that could make a decision that yes, in this case it'd be appropriate for that money to be
Let
used?
me take this offline, Mark, because
Yeah, sure.
I'm
I
not
just
sure
wanna
I know
raise it.
all the answers to that question.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I need support of the team.
Yeah.
But that's a great idea. And as you know, most of these things I come up with is from this group right here, is from each one of you that have given me inputs and said, Brian, can we do this? Should we do that? And like Nikki's advocacy thing was one of the things that quite a few have told me. So yes, Mark, let's take that offline.
Yeah, sure.
And talk about that. I'm a little over on time, so I apologize, but I think it was great. And I think it was some really great help and input, and hopefully it was worthwhile for all of you. Y'all have a great night, and cheers.